let's get into it. Let's jump over here and get things done, and get started with our friend Dr. John Lott, again from the Crime Prevention Research Center, who comes on board to discuss all these things with us this morning. Good morning, Doctor. How are you, my friend? How are things going?
Doing great. How about yourself?
It's fall. It's not snowing yet, so we're pretty happy about that. But we're getting ready for the white stuff, and getting ready for. We had a beautiful summer, and we're ready to go. I know you summer, and we're ready to go. I know you've had an exciting time. Congratulations again on your nuptials and everything else, and I just appreciate you taking the time out to come out here and talk with us today.
Sure. Well, when I lived in Montana up until recently, it could snow any month of the year. It actually snowed on July 4th. I don't know if you guys quite have that. I assume you might also.
Yeah, well, sometimes I remember one time when I was a kid, in the middle of July, there was a hailstorm, and it's hail and snowstorm on the lake we were at for about 4 hours. It was a kind of a crazy thing, but
Well, hail is a little bit different. I've lived in Texas and other places and gotten hail in the middle
yeah,
of summer too. So,
but it's weird. It's one of those things. I'm glad we don't have to deal with that too much. It's good. I like a little bit more of the warm weather as I get older. That's for sure.
right.
All right. Well, let's dive into this, and I want to start off. You've had several articles since the last time we talked, and I do want to get into this issue and some of the things in Minneapolis. You've got an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about the manifesto and gun-free zones and some other things. But I do want to talk first about President Trump's actions in Washington, D.C., his actions to bring in the Guard in the emergency situation because of the crime and the carjackings and everything else that's going on in Washington, D.C. And of course, there's a huge furor over it. I mean, the Democrats did not want to see any of this. The D.C. is still trying to sue right now in court to get to stop the president's actions. But incidentally, shocker of all shockers, the president did all this in an effort to stop some of the violent crime, the gun crime, the carjackings. And there's been a actual there's the murder. I mean, there's things have happened. Give me the details here about what's going on in Washington, D.C.
Right. Well, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's amazing to me how people call Trump a racist and whatever for federalizing law enforcement in DC there. But, if you want to reduce crime, you have to make it riskier for criminals to commit crime. And that means things like higher arrest rates, higher conviction rates, longer prison sentences, also making it possible for people to be able to go and defend themselves. All those things can make it riskier. And he's tried to move on all those different dimensions that are there. So, DC had about 1,300 patrol officers, which means that you have only about 400 on maximum on duty at any time to go and take care of a district of 721,000 people. And you can understand why the DC police union felt that they were stretched too thin. Plus, they had all sorts of restrictions on how the police were able to go and do their job. They couldn't chase after suspects, for example. There's a whole range of restrictions that they faced. And so Trump put over 500 new federal law enforcement on the street, FBI, drug enforcement agents, ATF, ICE. And he also put over 800 National Guard officers there, allowing them to go and do law enforcement type activities. And so effectively, you more than doubled the number of officers on boots on the ground at any point in time. And they've had a huge increase in the number of arrests. He's also changed the prosecutions that are there. The DC is different than the rest of the country in that the U.S. attorney for the district is in charge of prosecuting crimes by adults. During the Biden administration, the U.S. attorney who was appointed by Biden just didn't want to prosecute many people. There were during 2022, for example, he refused to prosecute about 67% of arrests. During 2023, he refused to prosecute about 56% of arrests. Judge Eugene Pirro is extremely different. I mean, she is an aggressive prosecutor. and people who are being arrested by the police are being prosecuted. And they've picked up a lot of illegal alien criminals who are there in DC and removed them, plus probably scared the ones that they haven't picked up into laying low or to moving out of the area, which
Right.
all those things reduce crime. And it's been an amazing, and also they've made it easier for people to be able to go and protect themselves. Up until recently, it was taking like 6 to 8 months to go and get approval for a concealed carry permit. And the Trump administration put pressure on DC to speed that up to within 2 weeks. So those are dramatic changes that have occurred. And we've
Yeah.
seen huge changes in crime. I mean, people have to understand what a high crime rate DC had to begin with.
Right.
If you compare it to the other 25 largest cities in the country, their murder rate last year was 28% higher than the number 2 city in the country, Indianapolis,
Right.
and was like 160% higher than the average for those cities.
Right.
They want to make DC the 51st state. DC's murder rate is 169% higher than the worst state, and 434% higher than the average for the other states. So we just went through a 13-day period where there
Right.
were no murders that had occurred in DC. The odds of that happening randomly is like 1 out of 800. And Mayor Bowser, the Democratic mayor who initially opposed Trump's actions, recently announced that during the first 3 weeks, there was an 87% drop in carjackings that had occurred in the district. And you can go through the list of violent crimes, robbery down by 42%, violent crime down by, I believe, about 40%. Those are really major changes that have occurred there. And to the charges by Maryland Governor Wes Moore that somehow these are racist actions by Trump, you have to understand the latest data we have is for 2021 for the racial composition of crime victims.
Mhm.
But 96% of those murdered up to that point were blacks. So,
How is it
here we're
racist?
having this huge drop in murders, and 96% of the murder victims are blacks. I don't know how that's racist. I mean, if anything, you would think people should be thankful that he's saving so many black lives.
Right, minorities. Well, people might ask, well, what does this have to do necessarily with Firearms Friday? I just find it thoroughly interesting. Washington, D.C. is one of the most unfriendly gun zones in the country. And yet they have this tremendous violent crime rate. Again, you hit on some of the statistics there, and we all know that Dr. Lott is kind of the king of statistics. This is what he brings to the table in a lot of things. I mean, when DC has a murder rate that's 434% higher than the national average and 136% higher than the nation's worst state, which is Louisiana, and yet it's a gun-free zone, or a gun control haven, I guess I should say. That's what really brings this to my attention is here you have this zone, crime is out of control. The president does these things, which of course everybody's opposed to. And whether that's just because it's orange man bad or whatever, the truth of the matter is that there's a correlation between the number of police officers that have hit the street, the visibility, all the hype and everything else. And it has created statistically significant drops in all these amounts of crime. It's, this is, and I'm not saying that we should do this in every city, but this is an obvious show that the Democrats, as much as they want to care about the people and the minorities and everybody else, they're not really caring about the victims of crime, it seems like, as much as they are caring about defending some of the perpetrators.
Right. I mean, that's been the puzzle for years. Mayor Brandon Johnson in Chicago saying it's racist to go and put criminals in jail, and blacks commit a disproportionate amount of the crime. But the thing is, their crime victims are blacks. 90% of blacks are murdered by other blacks. So, the question you have to ask is, do you want to go and make life easier for criminals, or do you want to make it easier for the victims of crime? And it's not just the direct victims of crime, though those are horrible and lives are being destroyed in many different ways. It's also the indirect victims. You have businesses that close down because of the crime. Who disproportionately owns those businesses? Who works in those businesses? Who shopped in those stores? And for the ones that remained open, who has to pay the higher prices for the products that are there because of the crime? And then you have all the people that live in those areas that own houses, whose property values are depressed because of the high crime rates that are there. Democrats claim that they care about the poor, that they care about minorities. And yet, when it comes to saving lives and protecting people and making sure that their lives are better, somehow it's wrong. They say they care about Black Lives Matter, but not when Trump is the one who's saving the lives. And this is relevant for Firearms Friday because, as I mentioned, it's not just making it risky for criminals to go and commit crime in terms of law enforcement and the court system, but also trying to make it risky in terms of making it a little bit easier. They still have a long ways to go in terms of victims being able to go and protect themselves. It's one thing to be able to go and say you can get a permit, but you have to wait 6 to 8 months to be able to go and get it. To be able to go and get it in 2 weeks now, is it still too costly? Are there still too many hoops that you have to go through with the training and other things that's required? Yeah, it's not like Alaska by any means. And the high fees and other things that they have, the high costs of getting a permit, stop precisely the people that my research indicate who benefit the most from being able to go and protect themselves. Basically,
Right.
the people who are most likely victims of violent crime, basically poor blacks who live in those areas. But at least it's moving in the right direction.
Well, isn't that the history, though, of gun control? Is it disproportionately affects those people? I mean, it's the small minority of people who do bad things with firearms that then make it harder for law-abiding citizens to protect themselves from that same small percentage of people who are doing bad things. That's the conundrum of gun control or any of these other laws where they want to penalize the vast majority of lawful law-abiding citizens for the actions of a fraction of a percentage of the people out there. That's part of this whole problem.
Right. Well, I mean, the problem that you have with gun control generally, and you're hitting on this, is that the gun control laws that you have make it more difficult relatively for law-abiding citizens to be able to go and have guns for protection than it does for the criminals. One thing you and I have talked about before is that every place this is just one example of it, but it's not limited to this. Every place in the world that's either banned all guns or all handguns has seen murder rates go up. They haven't even stayed the same one time. You think if gun control activists are right that gun ownership on net's bad, then you should see big drops in murder. You should see drops in suicides. And yet every single time, the murder rates go up, and often by very large amounts, like 3-fold, even 7-fold increases in murder rates afterwards. You think out of randomness, just once or twice, it would go down. But the problem is, and this is the reason why this applies to other things, is that if you make it relatively more difficult, I mean, it's going to be the more law-abiding citizens who are going to obey these laws. And to the extent that you disarm law-abiding citizens relative to criminals, you may take a few guns away from criminals. But if you're primarily having a law that primarily disarms law-abiding citizens, you're going to make it easier for criminals to go and commit crime.
Right. You've expanded the victim pool because they're defenseless now, because they are law-abiding by definition, and criminals by definition don't care about the law. So you've just made it easier for them to create a fish in a barrel scenario. Dr. John Lott is with us. He is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find them at crimeresearch.org. We're coming up on the break. We're going to take that real quick. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Dr. Lott's latest article with Thomas Massie on some of the things that are in the Minneapolis Killers manifesto and the things that the media continues to ignore. We've talked about it with Dr. Lott many times, but it just bears repeating until somebody actually starts paying attention to this stuff. We'll continue with Dr. John Lott in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. It's Firearms Friday.
We're broadcasting live through a series of tubes,
allowing all of these entities to provide streaming stuff going on the internet.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain. Sorry. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, we're in the break right now. Dr. Lott is our guest, and we are continuing on this Firearms Friday. We're going to get into this Minneapolis shooting. But again, I think that there's a lot of commonalities and threads. I do want to sidebar for a minute since we're in the break right now and get Dr. Lott's take on the president's latest action and on the action of the HSS director or head, and that is, of course, Robert Kennedy Jr. and his push now to start taking a look at SSRIs and other antipsychotics and psychotropic medicines and their effect on shootings. I know, Dr. Lott, you've done some research on this and some statistics, statistical analysis, I guess I should say, on this. What's your take on this move by RFK and the president to try and look at some of the causality underlying this violence that we're looking at?
Well, I don't mind them looking at it. I don't think they're going to find anything. You frequently have heard over the years that 90% of mass public shooters or 70% or whatever are on those types of drugs. I can't tell you the number of times I've reached out to people who have made that claim. And I said, well, I don't know how you got that data. I can't find it because of privacy rules. But can you provide me with the data that you have? I mean, you must have some data if you're making these precise percentage claims. And I have never been able to go and get them to give me the data, no matter who's making the claim. So, after about the 20th time you've asked for the data and they don't, they keep making claims, but they won't give you any data, it makes me more than a little bit skeptical about this. And but beyond that, I've talked to people in the field, and they tell me that, it's possible you can get psychotic breaks if you go and you change the level of the medication that somebody has. The problem is that these psychotic breaks would tend to be relatively short-lived. You're talking about something that's, a week or two, something like that. And the thing is, when you go and look at these killers, they're planning these attacks long in advance. I mean, 6 months is a short amount of time for them to go and plan these attacks in advance. Somebody like the Sandy Hook mass murderer was planning his attack over 2.5 years prior to his attack. And so, even if, we're not even talking about breaks that last a month or more. So, if they had something to do with it, they might have something to do with the timing, but not whether or not they were thinking about doing this. And I have to tell you, on top of that, I've looked at the diaries and manifestos for these mass murders, things that they've been putting together over long periods of time. And I don't see any changes in their mental attitude over the time period. They're basically obsessed with these things long in advance. And it's not like they become crazier in terms of their comments that are there. So I guess I'm just very skeptical. You have about half of these mass murderers were seeing mental health care professionals prior to their attacks. So it's possible that they were getting some type of drugs beforehand. But the thing is also, when you look at these their diaries and manifestos and other things, it's pretty clear, even though half of them were seeing these mental health care professionals, there's not one single case where any of these mental health care professionals identified any of these individuals as a danger to themselves or others.
Right.
And
We're let's continue this thought. I'm sorry, we're about 15 seconds here from rejoining the radio, so
Sure.
I want to
Sure,
crack
sorry.
in here because no, it's fine. I think this to me is part of the most fascinating topic surrounding this is this issue because we know that there's a mental health component to all this, but
Oh,
how
yeah,
do we
sure.
analyze it and how do we keep
No,
people
I'm happy
safe
to talk about that.
on that? So we're gonna kick things off with that. The Michael Dukes Show, Common Sense Radio. Here we go.
What the hell is an assault weapon? Does that mean that if we hurt your feelings, you should consider the Michael Dukes Show assault radio? Okay, we can accept that. Here's Michael Dukes. Kind of a dick, but somewhat funny.
All right, we're continuing now. Dr. John Lott is our guest from the Crime Prevention Research Center, author of the book Gun Control Myths and also More Guns, Less Crime. We were just talking during the break about the president's move through RFK Jr. to look at SSRI drugs and other psychotropics that have been used by shooters. Is there a connection? Dr. Lott doesn't think so, but I mean, he got a little bit deeper into this, the manifestos and the writings that these guys put forward. And you were just saying that you've looked at a lot of this stuff, and it's hard for the average person to try and find some of this information because I've been interested in reading what was on the shooter's mind. What were they writing? What were they planning? And you made an interesting observation that said, even though a lot of these known shooters were seeking mental health care, psychiatric care, whatever, none of their providers, their care providers, pinged to the fact that these people were violent. There was nothing that really stood out in those regards. Walk me through this. How does, if there's a huge component of mental health to these violent shootings, which I think we can all agree that there's some serious issues there. What do we have to do to fix it? How do we show that? How do we get the information out there? What has to happen?
Right. Well, I think a large part of the problem is mental health is based on people who have problems going out and asking for help. And so I've talked to people in the field, and they basically say they assume that the people that they're talking to are telling them the truth. But that's turns out to be pretty problematic in these cases. So, you read the diaries and manifestos for these individuals, and they brag about how easy it is to go and fool these people, these mental health professionals. I mean, mental health professional may ask, are you having violent thoughts? But unless these individuals are stupid, they're not going to go and say, yeah, I'm having violent thoughts that are there. And that's what they write in these things. So, you have even cases like the Buffalo mass murderer from a few years ago. He was in high school at the time, the year before the attack. And he was asked by a teacher what he was going to be doing over the course of the summer. And he said he was going to find a school that had summer school and shoot it up and kill as many people as possible and then go and commit suicide. Obviously, the teacher was concerned, and she flagged him, and he had to go to the hospital for 24 hours or 20 hours where he was evaluated by two mental health care professionals. And they asked him about it, and he said, oh, it was a stupid joke. He shouldn't have said it. He's sorry. It's just a joke. And both the mental health care professionals said, okay, he's joking. That's end of story there. You look at something like the Santa Barbara mass murderer. He had actually seen three mental health care professionals. One of them was an internationally recognized expert on youth violence, the head of psychiatric services at Los Angeles Children's Hospital. And but the same thing happened there. He'd be asked if he had any violent thoughts, and he would say no. And he was just amazed that he was able to go and fool these experts that were there. And so, you just see this over and over and over again. So here's my concern, and that is anybody who's looked at this realizes that there's a large psychiatric literature about their inability to go and identify these individuals as a danger to themselves or others. And if that's the case, what's your backup plan? What do you do if you're not able to go and identify these individuals? And obviously, the psychiatric profession, psychology and psychiatry, see themselves that they can, and they have a whole bunch of explanations for why they can't. One is just how rare it is. So we probably have about 3.5 to 3.9 million schizophrenics in the country. Well, if you look since 2019, there's been one mass public shooting involving somebody who was diagnosed as being schizophrenic. That's a pretty low rate that's there per schizophrenic.
Right.
And so, if I were to go to you, let's say you're a mental health care professional, and I say of those 3.5 to 3.9 million, identify the 1,000 that you think are the most likely to engage in these types of mass murders. Even if one of those 1,000 was the right one that's there, you still would be wrong 999 times there.
Right.
And so, and mental health care professionals will also tell you that those who have mental illness are less likely to be violent on average, and they're more likely to be victims of violent crime on average. And so, it's understandable, but here's the bottom line, and that is if you're not able to identify these individuals, and I have no problem with wanting to spend more money or more resources on dealing with mental illness. There's surely a lot of people on the street who are mentally ill, and people who go and commit these types of mass murders are overwhelmingly, almost completely suicidal, which is obviously a type of mental illness. But if you can't identify these guys beforehand, what's your backup plan? And that's allowing people to go and defend themselves. And this gets into our discussion that we'll be having about the Minnesota case that's there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you make a valid point. If they are intentionally misleading the healthcare professionals, then it becomes nearly impossible to diagnose it. Like you said, if they've asked the question, even if they're subtle and they don't just come out right and ask, are you having violent thoughts? Even if they beat around the bush, but the intent of the patient is to obfuscate the truth, it makes it that much more difficult. And you even mentioned when we were talking about some of the drugs and things like that, the statistics on that are iffy at best because you can't get real data on it. So it makes it more difficult to try and figure out if there's precursors or there's some kind of connection there as well.
Yeah. Well, we have to take into account what these individuals think that their goal is on this. And they're overwhelmingly, they want to commit suicide, but they want to commit suicide in a way that's going to get them media attention. I can't tell you how many times I've read these diaries and manifestos where they'll say, if I can only kill more people than such and such did, I can get even more news media attention. So, look, I'm not saying to go and get rid of the First Amendment. I wouldn't even know how to rewrite it in any case. But the problem that you have is that these guys, they want to get media attention. They know the more people they kill, the more media attention that they're going to get. And they know if they go to a place where their victims aren't able to go and defend themselves, they're going to be able to go and kill more people and get more media attention. And so the question is, how do you stop that? And the way you stop the attacks is by making it so that victims are able to go and defend themselves. Because if you have somebody there quickly who's able to go and stop the attack, you're limiting the amount of carnage that they're going to do, and you're going to limit in their mind the amount of media attention that they're going to get. I mean, you look at something like this murder that we had last week in Minneapolis. I have to tell you, and I've mentioned this to you before, one of the things that just drives me absolutely nuts with regard to the media bias is their refusal to go and talk about why these killers, these murderers, pick the targets that they do. Time after time after time, in their diaries and manifestos, they explicitly explain why they pick the targets that they do. You think that would be newsworthy, but the media refuses. So I just read you a passage from the manifesto for this mass murder, and that is, quote, "I recently heard a rumor that James Holmes, the Aurora theater shooter, may have chosen the venues that were, quote, gun-free zones," end quote. I would probably aim the same way. Holmes wanted to make sure his victims would be unarmed. That's why I and many others like school so much. At least for me, I am focused on them. Adam Lanza is my reason, of course, end quote. Of course, Lanza it committed the Sandy Hook Elementary School mass murder. And there are other parts of his manifesto where he explains he didn't want to go and attack early in the morning when the parents are dropping off their kids at school, or in the afternoon when they're picking them up, because he was worried that some of the parents may have concealed handguns. And they would be able to go and stop him before he could go and kill many people. So he wanted to go and do it during the middle of the day where there wouldn't be any parents around.
We're always looking for commonality and connectivity between these events. How, what is the most common thing? How can we prescribe? And that's why they're talking about like drugs and other things, but they continue to avoid this kind of topic. And we're going to continue with this here in just a second. Dr. John Lott is our guest, the Crime Prevention Research Center. We're going to get deeper into this manifesto from the Minnesota shooting. And again, the commonalities we see with every other shooting that's going on out there. Dr. Lott is our guest. We'll continue one more segment dead ahead. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. We return with more. And Dr. John Lott right after this.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Dr. Lott is our guest, Crime Prevention Research Center. You and I have talked about this, John, the almost the culpability of the news media in this. I mean, you just talked about how, in diaries and manifestos, they have the suicidal ideation, but the idea is to get as much exposure and media coverage and fame in those last minutes or posthumously right afterwards. And again, the news media, feeds into this. I mean, you just said a couple names, reading from the manifesto, saying a couple names of shooters. I don't remember the names of shooters anymore because I refuse to use those names. But the news media, they've gotten a little bit better, it seems like, over the years. It doesn't dominate the news cycle quite so much, but we've seen this time and time and time again, where it's the news media feeding into this frenzy, which again just helps plant that seed for the next guy to say, oh, I can one up it, or I can get at least as much exposure and fame or infamy as this other guy. This is another part of the issue that nobody's really talking about.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't think the legacy media is any better. They're pretty much the same as they've always been in terms of the coverage. You may go and argue that some of the newer kind of media like, the Megyn Kelly show or something like that, podcasts. Ben Shapiro, others refuse to mention the names of these mass murderers, but they still think that they're getting a lot of attention on this, unfortunately. Look, people have wanted to commit suicide forever, okay? But someplace along the line, some of those who craved attention, who felt that they weren't appreciated, realized that if they could get a lot of attention if they just killed a lot of people when they were committing suicide. And so the thing you have to do is take away the media attention. Now, as I mentioned, there's two ways you can do that. One is you could get rid of the First Amendment. There are plenty of countries like Canada, for example, which bars the media from talking about the names of criminals before their trial.
Right.
But I guess I'm not a big fan of that, and I wouldn't want to get rid of the First Amendment in any way. And I don't even know how you would rewrite it to go and allow that. But look, the other option is to make it so that they can't kill too many people. And the way you do that is having somebody there on the scene quickly to stop it. And so rather than a sign in front of the school that says, this school is a gun-free zone, have a sign in front of the school that says, warning, select teachers and staff at this school are carrying concealed and will go and use the guns to go and protect students and others that are there.
Right.
Alaska, I can't remember off the top of my head what percent of the adult population is a concealed carry permit, but obviously you're a constitutional carry state. You've been there for decades, so you don't even need a permit to be able to go and carry. And, my guess is you go to a grocery store or a movie theater or a mall or whatever, a restaurant, is very likely that there's a high probability that somebody nearby you is carrying concealed, and you have no idea whether they're carrying or not. And that's this huge advantage of letting teachers and staff carry. You're taking away the tactical advantages that these killers have. And maybe after the break's over, we can kind of talk about kind of the limitations of police being able to go and carry. We've recently finished a study on all the active shootings in the United States from 2014 through 2023, dealing with that.
Yeah, no, I would love to. And you're right. The solution here is more armed citizenry, trained and armed. Because again, no mass shooter is going to want to play Russian roulette with a sign out front that says, instead of gun-free zone, it says, warning, somebody in here is armed and will use deadly force. That's kind of the red flag for those guys, is they don't want to go in places like that, because we've seen what has happened. I mean, the Greenville mall shooting was a prime example of that, where a mass shooter got started and was immediately dropped by an armed citizen. So we know that those kind of things can help and it can work. And in states where we have constitutional carry and other things, the likelihood of these mass shootings happening extending, starting, but maybe stopping early, is much greater in states where citizens can defend themselves. All right, we are 20 seconds out. We're going to continue with Dr. John Lott. Please like and share the show and share it with your friends. Make sure that you tell them about Dr. Lott being on here and share this information. It's good stuff. And don't forget, of course, to go out and watch, subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we're putting up shorts every day of some of the highest, best moments we've got. Let's get to it. Here we go.
What the hell's an assault weapon? What isn't? If I assault you with a penguin, doesn't that make it an assault weapon? Does this mean that if we hurt your feelings, you'd consider the Michael Dukes Show assault radio? Okay, we can live with that. Here's Michael Dukes.
Dr. John Lott is our guest, president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. We are talking with him about the manifestos and diaries of many of the mass shooters, which he's had a chance to examine and go over and look at for commonalities. What is the connection between all of these events? The Minnesota shooting is one of the latest, of course, and Dr. Lott has found some connections in there, specifically with this idea of gun-free zones and the one solution to many of these problems. Dr. Lott, dive down into that for us. You just were talking about how armed citizens, armed teachers, armed staff can be a counterweight to these kind of things, but this is something that you're seeing not just in Minnesota, but in most of these writings.
Right. Well, I mean, as we were talking about before, you can't help but read these manifestos and diaries for these mass murderers and know that they spend long periods of time planning these attacks, and that they focus over and over again on picking gun-free zones. And yet, even though they explicitly talk about these things in their diaries and manifestos, the media just absolutely refuses to cover those things. I mean, it seems to me that would be newsworthy to go and say, yeah, we've had yet another mass murder where these murderers have explicitly picked those targets where they know their victims are unarmed, as this mass murderer last week said, and are easy targets. Now, one debate that I've had with conservatives is they want to have uniformed police officers in the schools, these school resource officers. And look,
Right.
I understand the desire there, but I think they're making a big mistake in terms of how they do that. And that is, if you have somebody in uniform there, you're giving real tactical advantages to those who are doing these attacks. So if I have one officer at a school, let's say, and he's in uniform, and somebody's thinking of attacking, and they see the officer there, what can they do? Well, if there are multiple buildings there at the school, they can wait for the officer to leave and move on to another building before they attack, or they can go to another building themselves and start the attack. Or if they're going to insist on attacking in that one place, who do you think they take out first? If they know that the school resource officer is the only person that's armed and they kill that person, they're going to have free reign to go after everybody else that's in the school there or wherever they're at. One way to think about this, we have air marshals on planes. Does anybody think that air marshals ought to be in uniform? Does
Right.
anybody think that that would be a good idea? I don't know anybody who would think that that's a good idea. And the reason why they don't think that that's a good idea is because if there was a terrorist on the plane and they knew that the air marshal was the only person that could really stop them from doing their crimes that are there, who do you think they're going to go after first? Because they know if they take out the air marshal, they're going to be much easier for them to go and do their attack. It's the whole reason why we have air marshals on planes, and the whole reason why we have them not in uniform. But yet somehow they don't make that connection when we're talking about other cases that are there, other places that we want to go and protect.
Well, and that's
we've got a study on this. I'll just say we've looked at all the active shooting attacks in the United States from 2014 through 2023. And what we found was that civilians with concealed carry permits actually stopped active shooting attacks at a higher rate than police did.
Right.
And that's in part for a couple of reasons. One is, as we're just saying, if you have somebody in uniform and the attacker is going to attack an area, he can wait for the officer to leave, or he can go and move on to another target himself. Both of those lower the odds that the police officer is going to be present when the attack occurs. With the concealed carry permit holder, they don't know who's armed before they go and do the attack. The other thing that's there is you only have so many police. We have like 650,000 or so police in the United States. You have maybe 200,000 that are on duty at any point in time. That's 200,000 officers who are doing multiple different types of jobs that have to go and protect 340 million people. That's asking a lot of those police officers that are there.
Right.
It's hard for that many officers to protect that many people. In the United States, we have 21.5 million concealed carry permit holders. Plus, we have 29 constitutional carry states where it's not even necessary for you to have a permit to be able to go and carry. So
Right.
we have a lot more law-abiding civilians out there to go and stop. A lot more. I mean, it's a huge factor more. It's like 100. It's like 100-fold more to be able to go and protect them. So it's more likely to be there. Now, the other thing that we found that was just amazing to me was not only are the police less likely to be there and compared to civilians, so the civilians are more likely to stop these attacks, they also stop them faster. And so when they do stop them, there are fewer people who are killed or injured. And then the most amazing fact is that even though police are stopping fewer of these attacks, there are like 7 times more more police officers killed in these attacks than you have civilians. And that's because it's like having somebody in uniform is like having somebody with a neon sign above them that says, "Shoot me first." So
Right.
they're the targets if an attack occurs there, and the attacker, the murderer there wants to go and do it, before the officer can leave the area, and they don't want to pick another target.
This is a failure. I think this is another failure of the mainstream legacy media, where not only are they obfuscating the fact that gun-free zones are a big part of the problem, they don't highlight, in fact, they downplay the role of armed citizens in stopping a lot of these events. If an armed citizen stops an event, then that news story dies in a few hours or a day, instead of being on the air for a full cycle saying that it was armed citizens that did it. And that, you're right, those are the solutions right there. Armed citizens and no gun-free zones, that's what's going to help this situation, because you're giving people the ability to protect themselves because you can't legislate evil or insanity. Like you said, if the shooter is going to lie to their own psychiatrist, you can't legislate stuff where they are intent on doing this harm. And the defensive gun use and the gun-free zones are two of the biggest problems. We got about 2 minutes here, Dr. Lott. Let's finish up with your thoughts on this overall. Give us a wrap up on this.
Right. Well, I mean, I think the whole gun control debate that we have right now would be dramatically different if, once in a while they would say, there's another diary or manifesto where this individual picked a gun-free zone to go and do the attack. It'd be very different if the media would say, 92% of these mass public shootings occur in places where guns are banned. They don't need to use that statistic, but they could just go and say, look, we've had yet another mass public shooting where it was a gun-free zone.
But is that the number,
we
though?
don't want to link it to the guy explicitly picking it because of that. And then finally, it would be a very different debate if some of these cases, on our website at crimeresearch.org, we've compiled like 50 cases since 2020 where police have said that a concealed carry permit holder had stopped what otherwise would have been a mass public shooting. And, these are dramatic cases, but they just get some local media coverage.
Right.
I can give you many examples where it's pretty clear that if the civilian with the permit concealed handgun hadn't been there and many people have been killed, it would have surely gotten international news coverage. But
Right.
it doesn't. It just gets some local media coverage when you have a civilian who stops these attacks and saves all those lives.
Yeah. Is 92%, is that the accurate number for, the number of shootings that have occurred in gun-free zones? Is it upward in the 90s like
Mass
that?
public shootings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 92%. That's a crazy number. And again, you'd think that the news media, if they were doing their journalistic, responsibility, they would look at those numbers. They would talk about defensive gun uses and things like that, but they don't. If you want to find out more, go to crimeresearch.org. Dr. John Lott author of the book More Guns, Less Crime, Gun Control Myths, War on Guns. And of course, he does lots of great work. You should go out there and follow him out there on everything he writes. Dr. Lott, we really appreciate you coming on board and joining us today. Thank you for being part of the show.
Well, thank you for being there.
All right, hold the line for a second. Folks, we're out of time. We got to go. Hour 2 is dead ahead. The Michael Dukes Show. We'll see you. Yeah, I mean, I feel some of the frustration here, Dr. Lott, especially, again, we've had, you and I have had nearly hour-long.
I have to run. I apologize, but I have to run right now.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for coming on board, Dr. Lott. Appreciate it.